Peace, family. Welcome to a live stream with MaatSpeaks, and we have some special guests here. Thank you for coming.
Family, welcome to
Okay, all right. So, everyone, thank you for coming. And so, if this is your first time here at MaatSpeaks, we aim to bring balance back into our communities using the principles of Ma'at. I post a lot of videos on that. I have Ma'at Wednesday, so I just posted a video uniting the principle of umoja and harmony, so you can check that out. But today we have some amazing and powerful men on our live stream today, and I'm so excited about this conversation. And so before we get started, I just want to remind you to subscribe, share this conversation. This is a very important conversation, something that is very important to me, which is our future, our kids, and discussing if we have been misguided or miseducated. All right, so I want to jump right into it here. So, Hannibal, if you will just tell them a little bit about yourself, and then also tell them where we can find you, or if they want to stay connected.
So my name's Hannibal. I'm currently splitting my attention between my clothing company, Free Breakfast Apparel, and substitute teaching and uh, husbanding, fathering. I did some time in the military, and I say it just like that. I did some time. Luckily, I got out of it with my head intact. I've spent time in corporate America. I got a degree in finance that I never formally used. Um, but overall, I just consider myself a teacher and a servant of our community. My politics are rooted in Black nationalism, and I lean towards Pan Africanism in my philosophy. But ultimately, my tribe is here in the States with all us uh, lost in the wilderness folks. But that's just a little bit. Real quick, this month we're sponsoring a school, speaking of education, in Atlanta, called the Columbo Institute. It's a freedom school rooted in African-centered education. So at the end of the month, we're going to be donating a portion of our revenues to that school. We've donated to them a couple times in the past. So check out what we're doing on my website. It's right there next to my name. We got a blog about the Columbo Institute, fantastic school. Where Black people are not, and Black children are not being uh, marginalized and otherized by the people we entrust them to throughout their school day.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I want to make sure I keep up with that. And I have a new face here. I already knew Hannibal, but brother Emo, thank you for joining. You got high praise from Mawale. So just tell me a little bit about yourself and where we can find you.
No, peace, family. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, I'm excited to join the conversation. So, my name is Emo Odo. Many people probably knew me in the past as Son of Malcolm on Twitter. I was so, but my name before that, people know me as they knew me Zach Brooks. That was my name before. I recently changed my name. Um, Currently, I'm pursuing my PhD at Temple University in the Department of Africology and African American Studies. I'm in my dissertation phase right now, so that's what I'm working on. And leading up to that, I guess my undergraduate studies were in history, the discipline of history, and I was kind of thrust into the discipline of history after I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So after my time in the, studying so much history, I when I got out of school, I went and I became a paraprofessional, or basically a special needs aide, for students in Malcolm X Shabazz High School in Newark, New Jersey. So I did that for a little while until I went to grad school. And while I was in grad school, I had two jobs for the most part until I got a TA position, a teacher's assistant position. But before, I was a substitute teacher throughout many cities, throughout many charter schools in Philadelphia. Um, and I also was an assistant to the archivist of the Charles L. Blockson Afro American Collection, which is basically a library and museum that's housed at Temple University. And I call it a library and museum of African world history, although Dr. Blockson himself is a collector of African American history, but he has so much documents, so many documents, so much artwork, so much so many books, so many, so many materials from so many different things that you wouldn't even uh think of. You know what I mean? There's so much in the Blockson collection. So I was an archivist over there, and so between teaching, between being a sub and working in the library and being in school, that's how I ended up where I am now. So and I'm also most importantly, my relationship, I guess we could say, to the North Philadelphia community as of now is with my chapter, Afrocentricity International, the Philly chapter. So shout out to the home team. And I'll leave it there. Everything else will come out in discussion, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for that. So as y'all can see, these are some great brothers on here that are going to be able to share their knowledge with us. So we're going to get into it. So remember, you can support this channel by buying me a cup of tea, or you can Cash App. And also make sure that you are supporting them as well. And we'll put their information in the chat as well so that you can continue to support them as well. All right, so let's get started with this conversation. So I want to kind of start off with talking about the term. Okay, so I've said this before on different panels using the term like white supremacy. So I think words are very important. So I do prefer to use the word white fragility. I did get that term from Professor Master Teacher and Elder Kabahia Watakamene. And that is a term that was coined by Robin DiAngelo. And so I'll just read it because I just want to give a basis to people who don't know what the term white fragility is. And so that is insulated. So it's talking about white people and how they are insulated from racial stress. They feel entitled and deserving of that advantage. And since they seldom experience racial discomfort and also dominate society, they do not have to build their racial stamina. So they are socialized in a deeply sense of superiority, are unaware or can never admit to racism, so they become highly fragile in conversations about race, and it challenges their identity. So they have this identity as being good, moral people. So they attempt to connect to the system of racism is unsettling for them, and they have an unfair moral offense. So the smallest amount of racial stress is intolerable and often triggers a range of defensive responses. So those emotions that they get from that is usually anger. They get argumentative, and then because of that, they'll go and withdraw or silence. And they can withdraw because they are insulated from the racial stressors that we often are, that we have to go through, because some of them can withdraw to their non-racial, places. And so their responses work to reinstate white equilibrium as they repel the challenge, return to their racial comfort, and maintain dominance within the racial hierarchy. So I will be using the word white fragility as opposed to white supremacy, just because of what that does to our minds when we hear white supremacy. So understanding that they are born, it's a superiority and entitlement, and their protection. They automatically have protection, that white advantage. Okay, so I'm going to show a video really quickly. It's a quick video, and then we're going to discuss that. So let's watch that real quick here.
Y'all owe this young man an apology, especially that goober that was coming through with his little thing. That was so rude. Where are you, you little coward? Come on back up here, let's talk.
This school principal is about to pull the ultimate Karen move.
The rudest people I've ever seen in my life. Close those doors. Close the doors. Now. Close the doors.
And the reaction from the crowd is justified.
You people are being so rude to not listen to this speech. It was my fault that we missed it in the program. Look who's leaving, all the black people.
Who's leaving? Gorduck mistakenly dismissed attendees before the valedictorians spoke, the station reported. She asked them to return to their seats, then said amid the confusion, "Look who's leaving, all the black people." Her comments sparked an immediate uproar, with people in the crowd angrily approaching the podium and exiting the ceremony in protest. When video of her remark went viral, it provoked even more outrage as people all over the country called for her resignation. Gorduck said later that people were being disruptive when the valedictorian attempted to speak and that she was frustrated. "When I looked up, all I saw was black families leaving, and thus the comment," she told NBC News. This is not just about Mrs. Gorduck's comments. The NAACP would defend her right as a private citizen to free speech. Francis Johnson, state president of the Georgia NAACP, said in a statement, "However, those entrusted with responsibility for our children must set a high standard marked by civility. That is obviously a test the former principal failed." Gorduck whimsically tried to defend herself by uttering to NBC News, "I didn't know black people was a racist term. I didn't say the N-word or anything like that."
And Ms. Haywood, how do you feel?
Same way. I believe she showed her true colors. I heard through some clips that she said something about, at least I didn't call them the N-word. So, I mean, wow. Why would you say something like that? That really is a shocker, and that shows who truly she is.
Jada Gibson, who was at the ceremony watching her cousin graduate, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that she made the rude remarks throughout the ceremony, including saying that the mouth of a crying baby should be taped shut. As you saw previously, she blamed the devil for her irrational, insensitive, and racist remarks at the school's graduation. Maybe just own it at this point. But no, she couldn't, adding, "It was not a statement of racism. It was just my frustration. I'm sorry it happened. So sorry. But God has forgiven me, and we'll just go on from there." Well, glad that's cleared up. Per ABC News.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What do y'all think about that video? So whoever wants to go first.
Jump in.
Yeah, just jump in.
Well, I think what's interesting is she said she doesn't think that black people. She said she didn't think black people is a racist word, right? And I think what's kind of interesting. I mean, black people deal with this too. I mean, African people, we deal with this too. I think black tells us who we are. I mean, black tells us what we look like, but African tells us who we are. Like our being, our African culture is what we are. We are Africans. Now we do. Africans primarily have darker skin, black skin, darker skin, but normally people call you black from without. And because black people have existed intergenerationally in exile from understanding our own history and culture, I think we've come to accept terms like black and Negro and colored kind of terms. And, I think the white woman is, I don't know, I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't make me upset because I've come to expect that kind of behavior. I think the woman, she's upset because she couldn't control people, which is pretty typical of white women in schools. When they can't control everybody, they get upset, call people wild and feral and whatever else. So, I mean, it's it's pretty standard. I don't I don't know how
Yeah,
standard
that's
of
good.
it.
Hannibal, what about you? What do you?
So when I watched this earlier today, several things popped out at me. And the first thing is she's in Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people don't know that Stone Mountain, Georgia takes its name from Stone Mountain, which is home of the biggest Confederate monument in the country. There are the faces of the likes of Jefferson Davis carved into Stone Mountain. Jefferson Davis, who was the leader of the Confederacy. So that's the first thing that pointed out. As soon as I saw Stone Mountain, I said, "Oh, we're gonna get some ignorance here." The second thing that popped out at me was the intellectual dissembling that this lady tried to get away with by saying, "I didn't know black people was a racist term." It's not, but you're singling out black people. You're calling attention to the race of people who are doing something you'd like to highlight in public is the racist act. It wouldn't have mattered what you said. She could have said darkies, black people, African Americans. It would have all been the same thing. Her trying to highlight what she determined to be deviancy on the part of black people. It doesn't matter what they look like or what their demography was as they were walking out the door of their graduation commencement. They're leaving. If it bothers you, let it bother you, but don't let their race be a part of it. She had to let their race be a part of it because she's a goddamn racist. Period. And that brings me to my final point. You're the principal of the school and you're a full-on racist. You are in charge of our children's academic outcomes, and you are a goddamn racist. And this is the ultimate problem. That all too often we have to put our children in the hands of people who despise them and despise us. She was fired, and I'm glad about it.
There was the thing, because I did want to say when you talked about white fragility from Robin DiAngelo, I actually think white fragility, terms like white fragility and maybe even white privilege as well. I think those terms are insufficient. Now I understand the problems with using white supremacy alone. I think Francis Cress Welsing gives us the most effective definition for racism, white supremacy. Racism and white supremacy are synonymous. They cannot be separated. They cannot be used apart from one another and within the context of Francis Welsing's definition. So I think her definition, I mean, I can pull it up and read it if you like, maybe at some point. But I think racism, white supremacy is more effective than white fragility or white privilege, because I think oftentimes those terms are couched in an assumption that racism has its origin in ignorance. And I do not believe that racists are ignorant. I think racists inherit the knowledge of the actions and history of their own ancestors, and they participate in that same culture, that same way of thinking, because it's to their benefit and to their advantage. So I don't believe in the idea of white ignorance. I think white ignorance is a coping mechanism where white people pretend not to understand why they act the way they do towards people of color, so that they can maintain this veil of virtue, this idea that they are still good people. But
Right.
racism isn't about good or bad. It's a power dynamic. So I don't believe that I don't believe it is about morality so much as it's about a power distinction. So her being a principal and her having an attitude like that, I mean, there's ultimately going to be institutional ramifications for that. And I think that's, to me, that's the larger issue.
You definitely brought up some good points, brother Emo. I know what you mean, though. I know why you don't like the term, and I don't like it either. That's why I usually add the word doctrine afterward.
Okay.
So to me, adding the doctrine, because when first of all, a lot of people talk without thinking. So if you say white supremacy, and you're not thinking and you're not on guard against your thoughts, then you are going to be digesting white and supremacy, and that's unhealthy.
Right.
And it's as unhealthy as it is inaccurate. The only thing supreme about them right now is their temporary position in the social order, which they've carved out through violence and terrorism. So, but aside from their position that they've got fairly recently, and that they won't keep forever, there's nothing supreme about them. And that's why, I know, and I agree with you, we don't want people to be brainwashing themselves with these terms. I think, and you can feel free to, respond to this. Like if you add doctrine, then you're making it a compound phrase, a noun that is the only thing supreme is an aspect of the doctrine, not the people that it speaks to.
Okay. And I like that. I do like that instead, in the perspective on it. Because I always say that white people are maybe, I don't know, do you think that they are innately racist? Because I think every white person on this planet is racist because you're born into it. So you automatically think you're superior because of the images, because of what you're being taught. And I'm not going to say on the planet, but in the United States, they are innately, because of the images, because of entertainment, because of how they're being taught, they're taught to be supreme. So and I know you just said, Brother Emo, you just said that they know, they're not ignorant of it. Hannibal, do you agree with that? Do you think that there's no ignorance there?
You want to know something? To be honest, I think there are varying amounts of ignorance across the spectrum, but there's a point to which the ignorance becomes pathological, and a lot of them pretend to be more ignorant than they are. Okay. I tend to agree with you that most whites are racist or closet white supremacists, to a varying degree. Even a lot of the well-meaning ones, the so-called progressives, the liberals, because like you said, they have a social conditioning. It abounds in the media, it abounds in the education, all throughout K through 16 through 20. Every aspect of education is infused with white supremacist doctrine. So anyone who is not on guard against that and absorbs it without critical thinking is going to internalize it. But here's the worst part, is that it's not just the whites. There's a lot of black people who are white supremacists in their heart. And it's the saddest shit ever. Can I swear on here, or is that a problem?
I'm not. I don't know.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try not to, but it's so sad when you can hear in your brother or your sister's speech that they think these white people got something on them. Like, oh, I want to get white people money. Little do you know, most white people in America are poor. Little do you know.
Well, and can I jump in real quick?
Please.
Because especially to the poor point, I mean, I remember having a discussion with my friend about Marcus Garvey's problems with communism. And Marcus Garvey's problem with communism was, why would you want to align yourself with the most reactionary and violent element in American society, which is the poor whites who are competing with Black people? So the lynch mobs are poor white people, right? So that was Garvey's point about communism. But like but really what I found the definition of Francis Welsing's definition of white supremacy, and I think it captures a point you made, Hannibal, about how our brothers and sisters. So I mean, I share this definition all the time with my class because I think it's a very tight definition. So I'm gonna read it, okay? She calls it a functional definition of racism, white supremacy, or apartheid. As a Black behavioral scientist and practicing psychiatrist, my own functioning definition of racism, in parentheses, white supremacy, is as follows. Racism, white supremacy, is the local and global power system and dynamic structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined. See, you get to catch everybody with that. And then which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity. So their ontology, their culture, racism comes out of their being. It's who they are in reaction to other people, because when you define yourself as white, you're defining yourself in contrast, right? So to me, whiteness by definition is racism. But so basically says for the ultimate purpose, basically which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, religion, sex, and war. Full court press, as she says, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet upon which the vast and overwhelming majority of people are classified as non-white, Black, brown, red, and yellow by white-skinned people. And all of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. So what I love about Francis Welsing's definition is it's a global definition of whiteness, where I can look here in the United States at people who are Anglo-Saxons. I can look at the French. I can look at Arabs. I can look at the ruling elites in India. I can look at people who classify themselves as some form of mixed or Creole, or I can anybody who identifies consciously or subconsciously as white is participating within this power system. So in order for us to not participate within or reproduce the doctrine, right? Then we need to be ourselves as African people. We need to be, because we don't have a doctrine of white supremacy. Our ancestors did not have a doctrine of white supremacy. That doctrine was imposed upon us. And it systematically is imposed upon us when we participate in their institutions. And so to the schooling point, and I'll leave it here. I think what happens is we send our kids to institutions that are controlled by Europeans and racists, quite frankly. And the only way that this situation ultimately gets resolved is if we retain or we regain or keep control over the socialization of our children. And I think that's why the homeschooling movement is such a thing. And I also know if we controlled our own schools and our own institutions, that's another alternative too. So I don't see white supremacy as total. I think it's totalizing. it can seem totalizing, because if we don't know where an alternative place for us to nourish ourselves and facilitate our own development, if we don't make those kinds of spaces and liberate those spaces for ourselves, then we're dependent on the plantation spaces produced by these white people in these races. So
that's awesome. And I mean, you touched on a lot there. So that is the basis, really the basis of this conversation. And so did you have anything to say to that, Hannibal?
No.
No. Okay. All right. So we'll just kind of backtracking just a little bit, and we see the blatant. So we understand the blatant racism that happens, just like we saw on the video. We understand that being blatant, but what about the what we consider the microaggressions or the covert racism? So there is another term here. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with this term, but racial battle fatigue. And
Yeah.
so the physical and psychological toll taken due to constant and unceasing discrimination, microaggressions, and stereotype threat. So this was first studied, if I'm not mistaken, it was first studied on college campuses. Well, they were going to PWI, so predominantly white institutions. And so we saw the symptoms of that. So the symptoms of the racial battle fatigue is that individuals who work in these environments with chronic exposure to discrimination and microaggressions are more likely to suffer from forms of generalized anxiety manifested by both physical and emotional symptoms. So we usually discuss this in terms of adults, but if we're thinking about this, wouldn't our children be suffering from racial battle fatigue as well? Even if they're not in predominantly white institutions, they're being taught by white teachers, or just the fact that it's a system that is stemming from the white institution. So even if it's taught by Black teachers, it's still their system. So can y'all touch on that a little bit? So what are the microaggressions that are happening? What is the covert racism that is happening while they're in school in these white institutions?
You know, it's funny about the term microaggressions. They're not always micro.
Right.
You know, on their face, they seem micro, but their ramifications are often not micro. And the reason why is because when we clash against the system, when we face punitive action, it's harder for us to recover from it. I mean, I went to the University of Illinois, Chicago. There was a professor there, Bill Ayers, I want to say. His last name's definitely Ayers. Dude is a legit convicted domestic terrorist. He was a part of the group called the Weathermen. And in the 60s or the 70s, they bombed buildings here in the United States. So he did this act, was found guilty of it, and is now, and at least when I was attending, he was a professor at UIC. I have misdemeanors, victimless crimes that have prevented me from getting $35,000 a year jobs, because it's easier to use that to keep my Black ass out, because they really don't want us there anyway. So I say that to say this: a microaggression in the form of giving your sixth grader a detention or a suspension, right? That suspension for your Black sixth grader may be grounds for expulsion, whereas the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy can get suspended 6-7 times, or do the same infraction, not get suspended, you know, so on and so forth. Microaggressions and on their face, again, aren't the issue. It's what they belie, what they are symptoms of. So if you have a manager, who I like to call these people managers, principals, police, judges, these are gatekeepers. You got a gatekeeper making microaggressions at the gate, this person is showing you that they're discriminatory in their heart. So when we come through the gate, there's a good chance we're not going to get justice. We're not going to get a fair outcome. And we know that because you be microaggressing all the damn time, showing us. It's like tipping your hand, you know? Like, I don't, and that's what people need to understand. There's a racism in power. I always call attention to people, to the gatekeepers, to how many times we have to bump into these whites at gates where they have decisions to make that impact our lives. Hiring managers, cops, doctors, teachers, judges, admissions advisors, etc., etc., etc. A dirty homeless white person calling me a N-word as I walk by would make me laugh so hard. I'd be like, you have nothing, and you have the goddamn nerve to be insulting me, a person who has something. I could have gave you $1. It's funny. And I'm not going to be fighting mad over a dusty, dirty redneck who calls me an N-word. But when Principal Gerduck says, look at all the black people leaving, I don't care that it wasn't an N-word. Some people might call that a microaggression. I call it a sign that this woman, when she gets black transcripts across her desk, the outcome might not be favorable. When she gets black disciplinary action decisions to make on behalf of black children, the outcome may be prejudiced and unbalanced.
Right.
So that's what I feel about microaggressions.
I think one of the when you said microaggressions, I operate as though all white people are already, they're weird or they're racist. That's my go-to. That's how but the thing is, in terms of microaggressions, I think some of the things that people don't always appreciate are the ways that like we were talking about the doctrine of white supremacy, it can shape and eclipse the way we understand our own history. And I think that's, to me, the biggest quote unquote microaggression that goes without being addressed, because if we're African people, if we're black people, our history does not begin on these shores. So when we begin our history at 1619, I see that as a form, maybe a microaggression, but I see it as a form of epistemic violence. I see that as something that cuts us off from the majority of our history and the continuity that we share with our ancestors. So I see that as one of the hugest problems, one of the biggest problems that we face as African people in the United States, because we don't know enough about ourselves to use our history to shape a reality or to shape our own spaces for ourselves. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to reestablish for ourselves in order to resolve the problem of white supremacy. Because otherwise, the thing is, if we keep waiting around on Europeans or other people who classify themselves as white to decide that, you know what, this is working for me, and I think I'm gonna give it up, right? I think I'm gonna go against what's beneficial to me. I think the longer we wait around on that, the longer we spin our wheels and we get trapped, in contradictions. We don't understand how we can resolve for ourselves our own issues, and we keep going to the people who have put us in this situation and continue to perpetuate our oppression and marginalization. We're looking for these people to change their minds because it works to their benefit. And I don't see how that's logical. That's insane to me. But I also understand that people are socialized and educated, or rather miseducated, into ideas that say this is what your orientation should be if you want a solution. These are the only solutions that are on the table if you want to change your condition in this country. And I think that's why that longer view of our history, the whole chronology of African and world history, I think when we have a complete understanding of that, we won't accept footnote status in their history. We won't accept first black this, first black that. We won't accept when they say, "Oh, well, he's the good one and he's the bad one." We'll say, "Well, we know where these people fit within our own societies. We don't need you to qualify who's good for us and who's bad for us. We can do that for ourselves." But I think that those kinds of things require a dedicated effort, because we need to be dedicated, because they are very dedicated to maintaining what it is that they've established, their system of domination, their colonial system that they've placed over us. And that's what miseducation is all about. How do we bring other people into cooperative submission? And when we know our history, when we know our ancestors, you're always going to have people who comply. Maybe not everybody. Maybe we'll have more who are more willing to lean the other way towards their own people, right? So
and just to piggyback off that, brother, and I don't disagree with nothing you just said. Like you cooking over there. No. The thing is, our history definitely does not begin over here with slavery. Right. However, we don't even have a proper understanding of the magnitude of our accomplishments within the construct or the time frame of our time here on in North America. Mm-hmm. It's not like we were look, it's something special to have gone through all that terrorism for generation after generation and to still come out with as much grace and beauty and power that we have right now. Like the people who came out of that, our Booker T. Washingtons, our George Washington Carvers, bro, who fine-tuned the filament in the light bulb, did all that within the construct of the transatlantic slave trade, Reconstruction, got the damn Jim Crow era. Like, these are monumental efforts when you really think about it. And that's why I don't feel less than ever standing next to no white person. Whereas before I knew of those things, I did. When I was a shorty, as a teenager, and all I was absorbing was the few books I was reading, but mostly Western media. And Western media and Western education says white people did everything. Everything good that you like came from white people. And it doesn't talk about how, well, there might have been a white person at the helm of this company, but dude was using slave money, reinvested slave money, the capital that made his vision a reality. Like, that part is not told. Our accomplishments are not taught in the school, right? And that's why our kids walk around feeling less than. And then when you feel less than, then you're susceptible to making compromises so that you can try to feel some self-esteem and you can try to get on. I got to be like the whites or else I'm not going to be able to get on. And the violence of it all is that the system, okay, they say, fine, let's control our education. Let's get people in homeschooling. Let's get them all in Black African-centered schools, but that costs. And then so how do we pay for it? When we're dealing with economic terrorism as well. It's like all these interrelated socioeconomic dynamics that hurt the all these institutions that we need to control and get our kids within in order for them to get the best outcomes. That's why I support schools so much. Like, this month it's Columbo. Next month is going to be Gary Comer College Prep on the south side of Chicago in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. They're doing fantastic work. They got a mentorship program. They got people over there who care about these Black children and their educational outcomes, and we have to support those efforts.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's so easy for them here in the West to hurt our kids' educational efforts because all they got to do is arrest us. Like, if I was arrested and kept in jail for a month, I'd be ruined. You know, my income is a function of my labor, right? And if I, and it, you know, a lot of us are in this boat. You get locked up for a month, you can lose your home, your kids, your job, everything over an arrest that can get overturned. You could be exonerated and still lose everything. So, you know, this education aspect cannot be, there's no way of emphasizing it too much. There's no way. It's the only piece of the puzzle that really matters. And I want to give you an analogy and then I'll stop running my mouth. So the best superhero movies out right now are coming out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And my wife's a filmmaker, so I was thinking to myself, if my wife wanted to make one of these movies and she needed animators, I guess like the best thing, if you had the money, is to try to get the animators that they use. Now they know that, so they probably overpay them, and they probably give them all kinds of creature comforts, 401k, free this, free that, free this, free that, because they want to hog the talent. So if I can't afford their talent, what is the only alternative? I got to develop comparable talent through education.
Mm-hmm.
And if I develop them and bring them onto my team while they're affordable, and then we make art that brings in the bag,
Mm-hmm.
then now I can pay them the rates that they deserve.
Right.
Now that they got some experience, now that I'd poured into them and invested in them. But the root of it was the education.
Mm-hmm.
The only way that you can match your enemy who is superior, who is not superior, but has superior resources, is to educate their competition. Your allies, educate your allies to fight the people that you can't afford. That's why you can't emphasize the importance of education enough. It's the only way. And we have too many parents and people walk around thinking that, well, it's just a place for them to hang out for 8 hours a day while I'm at work. You know, it ain't no big deal, especially now when they don't hold kids back. They don't fail kids. They really don't fail kids. Your kids can do F work and still matriculate.
No child left behind.
Yeah. You're being left behind as you're being pushed forward.
Absolutely.
It's nuts.
So let's get into what that looks like. So the true education. So what is education? Like, what is true education for us? Like, what is that going to even look like?
I like one of my favorite quotes from Nana John Henrik Clarke is the true purpose of education is to teach a people to be responsible handlers of power. So I think that naturally, I think that's why we should distinguish between schooling and education.
Mm-hmm.
Because education is really kind of like a formalized socialization, right? So I think sometimes we get caught up in the pedigree of institutions that we did not create for ourselves. And sometimes we don't understand that what it is that we learn in these institutions, it really works to alienate us further from who we are than to teach us about who we are and how to act on our own behalf. So I think that's what true education is. I think that's why we should place such strong emphasis on ancestors, like on our ancestors. I remember when I was substituting in a class, they had an English class, and they was giving the kids all this stuff on William Shakespeare, and I think they was reading Hamlet. I think that's what it was. They were reading Hamlet, all this old English, and the more they were reading it, and the kids start disengaging. Some would walk out the room, start doing whatever, The more I thought about it, I was like, they need to read somebody who talks the way they speak, like the way they speak. They need to read some of these authors that write in Ebonics. They need to. Why are they wasting their time with 16th, 17th century old English when they could be learning how their own ancestors here in the United States spoke? They could be reading Zora Neale Hurston. They could be reading, Richard Wright, Tony Kadebambara. They could be reading Baldwin. They could be reading all of these people, right? But they're wasting their time trying to learn old English, right? But if you think about it, really, what it is, that's the logical consequence of being a part of an institution that they've created, because the reason that they create the schools the way they do is for the explicit purpose to socialize you into being acceptable in their society. So what is your place within white society? How do white people think of us? They want us to be reduced to servitude. They don't want us to be thinking and functioning on our own behalf here in this country, so it stops being their country, right? But go ahead, bro.
Well, the thing is, and when you really think about it, so they forced Shakespeare on us, and to a degree, if a young brother or sister determines that his or her fate is tied into working and living within the dominant society's institutions, he or she can use that exposure to Shakespeare. But if he or she is not consuming it critically, while also consuming the Zora Neale Hurstons, while also consuming Black art and African-centered art, then they're doing so at the risk of reducing their soul, their Africanness. So you got America, you got PWIs, you got the status quo, you got mainstream media, mainstream education. It only makes sense that they would reinforce their own mores and culture and codes. It only makes sense. The problem is that they reduce ours. Okay? They reduce ours, and then they do not create a space by which we even know that there's other things to learn. If you're not plugged into, like if you don't have a mind like ours, then you may not even know to point a child to Zora Neale Hurston. You may not even know to point a child to Bell Hooks. You may not even know that. And so then we have this problem that we don't even know we have. It's the old adage of sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. Now I say divest completely. I say divest completely. And when I say that, I mean, I'd like to see Black people saying, I would rather get paid $50K to work with some Black folks and create jobs and opportunity for other Black people than to be a cog in the Google wheel and get double that. I'd like to see that, but I also understand that if a person makes a choice to have their talents deployed at Google, I ain't going to knock them. They're doing their best. They want to feed their kids. I want to feed my kids. I understand where you're coming from, right? But the problem is that if a substantive portion of our community doesn't endeavor to be Black and be Black centric and create Black spaces and create Black institutions, then we're going to keep being reduced. And so the example I'd like to point to people is this. When people say, what do you want from the dominant society? What do you want? If you could tell these gatekeepers and these power brokers to give you something, what would you want? The first thing I say is just stay out of my damn way.
Yes, leave us alone. Yes.
Leave us alone. Because the thing is, I have seen white people do criminal acts at the corporate level that harm tens of thousands of people. They pay a small fine. They keep it pushing. They get awards. They retire on schedule. Hell, here in Chicago, a police chief, John Burgess, did time in the feds for torture and still kept his pension. After he got out of the pen, he was drawing taxpayer-funded pension. Meanwhile, there are Black people who have lied about where they live to get their child in a better school, who have ended up in jail.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is the problem. I don't need anything extra from you, MFs. I need you all to get out of our way. And that's it.
Yeah, nothing to say to that. So I want to address this question here. So what do you think of episodic history versus holistic history in terms of education?
Real quick. I'm so sorry. Because I be getting riled up. You asked about true education. I'm going to quickly add something.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Quickly, and then we're going to get on this. When people ask me, should my boy go to college or should he go to the military? When I talk about college with young people, I say, you need a skill more than you need an education, because you can educate yourself outside of a formal institution. Malcolm X educated himself partially while he was in prison, but he did not come out of prison with a skill that could be easily deployed in today's contemporary times. When I'm so proud. My 12-year-old daughter wants to be an obstetrician. I'm proud and I'm happy about that, because I know that if she obtains those credentials, she has a skill that can be deployed quickly, that not many people can do, that is highly regarded and has a high wage, and gives her a sense of purpose and peace of mind and feelings of worth. Meanwhile, I have a finance degree. No easily deployable skills. When I graduated from college, I end up working at Verizon Wireless, selling cell phones with high school diploma holders. Because number one, I had a criminal record, and number two, a finance degree ain't no skill. You know what I'm saying? So true education to me is rooted in critical thinking and a skill that can be deployed for the gain of yourself and your household and your community.
Well, brother, I think you do have a skill. I think there are, blue collar, right? Like blue collar, like occupations, and like other occupations that might be, I don't want to say white collar. I want to say, they're more like you using your mind, right? So there's physical labor, and then there's other forms of labor. But to your point, I was gonna say, I think that's what made Marcus Garvey so prolific, because the fact that he was a craftsman, the fact that he was able to be a printer and make printing presses, in numerous different countries, it gave him the confidence to not feel dependent. So he didn't feel dependent on anybody trying to hire him, anybody telling him what his self-worth was, because he knew he could make his own way for himself. So I completely agree with you.
And I'm just going to, before we hit this question here, I just want to read this from Know Thyself, Naeem Akbar. He said, education in its inception was understood as a process of harnessing the inner potential that was yet unexpressed and bringing it out or up into consciousness. The process of equipping the human being with the consciousness awareness of their true nature was an essential task that every society provided for its offspring. They fully understood the gross limitation of reproducing their flesh in the young without reproducing their minds. So that just made me think about what y'all were talking about. So let's look at this question here. What do you think of episodic history versus holistic history in terms of education?
I would argue basically that the problem that we face as it relates to knowing our history is that our history is fractured into episodes that are determined by episodes in European history. So for example, you'll hear people say we have ancient, feudal, and modern history, right? They say ancient African history, feudal African history, and modern African history, right? And that's the way European history is broken up. So if we're coming from in each one of those episodes in European history is determined or it's marked by an achievement or a group of achievements or something that happened in European history that they achieved for themselves. So if they achieve things and mark their history with those points, those demarcations in history, and make episodes, what we should be shaping and determining our history based on what we've achieved in our history. We shouldn't be shaping our history based on what others have achieved. That's why the 1619 year, that's a British perspective. That's the perspective of the Pilgrims. We are not the Pilgrims. If you're thinking about 1492, we are not Christopher Columbus. African people were here, on the boat with Christopher Columbus, way before Christopher Columbus, and numerous times before Christopher Columbus. So why are we using 1492 as the marker for understanding our history? It's because we're coming at it from the perspective of Christopher Columbus, you see, without recognizing that. So I think what we need to do is, there are many people who've tried to undergo or tried to, I guess you could say, create different periods of African history based on markers in our history that we've achieved. So, I mean, some of those people, I know Chancellor Williams in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, he outlines the way we should structure our history, African history. I know Dr. Molefi Asante, he has his book, The History of Africa. I know Milana Karenga has something where he tries his hand at it. I mean, there are many African scholars who are writing African history and encouraging others to write African history, but based on the purview of African people and African achievements. So I think that's the way we need to approach it, and I think that would result in what the brother said when he was talking about a holistic history, right? I mean, I might use a different term, but I think based on what I think that means, that might be I think that's a good direction to go in.
Okay. All right. So, and so I want to get into the actual function. So the function of education. So, in the chat, Inya was talking about the difference between being skilled. I'm sorry. And Hannibal touched on this, but the difference between being trained and being educated. So, again, Naeem Akbar says people who are trained can only serve those educated people who were their trainers. And he talks about in the book, like the difference between the dog that is trained, and then the dog that is in its natural in its natural state. So a dog that is trained, putting on the dresses, dancing around, but a dog that is educated, then that dog is able to defend itself against its enemies and its attackers. It's able to hunt. It's able to feed itself. And so that dog's behavior, even as a trained dog, it's because it's wanting food, it's wanting shelter. So it's able to obtain food and shelter from the master, but it does not afford the dog to be able to actually take care of itself. And so when we think about education versus being trained in our school systems, are we being trained or are we being educated in the school system? Are our kids being trained or educated?
Or they're being indoctrinated mostly.
Indoctrinated, okay.
Two primary functions come out of K through 12 schooling: indoctrination a little bit of education, but mostly indoctrination and socialization. And when I think of socialization, I'm thinking about it specifically in terms of how kids get along with their peers and how they learn to interact with people in authority, their teachers, the administrators, etc. And there's value in learning socialization, but only if it's in a loving and non-exploitative environment. Our kids are definitely not being. The education takes a backseat to the training and the indoctrination. I don't think I really got educated by a school until I got into college. And even then it was very Eurocentric, but I did learn how to think critically, and I learned how to problem solve, and I learned how to research, and I learned about statistically credible data and et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of good that came out of my time in college that was true education. But a lot of us miss that. I think that when you're fully educated, not only are you a critical thinker, but you're a problem solver, and you have the ability to learn and synthesize new information outside of academia. So the education should unlock your mind and ultimately give you the ability to further educate yourself. Because there's a difference between reading information, taking in new information, and synthesizing it with your experience, with what you observe in the natural world, and being able to form conclusions that make sense, that are logical, rational, et cetera, et cetera. I consider myself a bit of a philosopher. I am big on epistemology, ontology, axiology. I wasn't exposed to any of these concepts in college because I didn't study philosophy. I didn't study anything that where that was relevant.
Right.
I developed an interest after I got out, and because I got some skills while I was at that damn school, I had a foundation by which to add to my knowledge base.
Mm-hmm.
In the absence of true education, I probably wouldn't have been able to integrate epistemology and axiology and ontology and their related notions into my current guiding philosophy and guiding principles. So, I hope I was, that to me, that's what true education is about. It's about enabling and empowering and giving you the tools by which to help yourself. And it should be, rooted in because I was trained before I was educated. I was trained in the military to do violence and to obey orders blindly.
To the military point, I was when we were talking, when the training question made me think of one of my grandfathers. One of my grandfathers was a Montford Point Marine. So that's the first unit of Black Marines that were they were the first Black men that were able to join the Marine Corps. They were trained at Montford Camp. And, the thing is, the Marines are supposed to be the United States military most elite troops, right? I don't have a prejudice for one or the other. I just repeating what I heard. So, but the point I'm making is many of our people, and not just in the military, maybe I should use a different example. Let's use Ben Carson, right? Ben Carson is an extremely talented brain surgeon, highly skilled, right? But the thing is, he's been extracted or alienated from his own history and culture. So all of those skills are being utilized to which ends or to whose ends. I'm not saying it's great. He saves people and he saved many people, and that's a good thing. And but at the same time, when Dr. John R. Clark says, take what you do best and do it for your people, what happens is your socialization and your education, what you know of yourself and what you know of your past and what you know of your people, shape where you will use your skills. And oftentimes we are removed from the knowledge of how to relate to our own people and act effectively on our own behalf. So what happens is we get highly skilled in many of these institutions, but we often don't have the orientation or the ideology or maybe some of the other knowledge bases that we might need to implement these skills on behalf of our own people. So I think it's a combination of things as it relates to education in order to fix the problem. I know. No, I'm not. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm gonna leave it there.
Okay. So I hope y'all are sharing this. They are dropping so many jewels right now. So please share, subscribe, and like. So I'm going to touch on this question here. Could you ask about the role that intuition should play in raising African children, as well as the related idea that children already know everything deep down?
Well, I think what it is when as it relates to intuition is people have ways of interfacing with forms of knowledge or configurations of knowledge that maybe they can't articulate that they understand, right? And I think that's what we're calling intuition often. I think what happens is when people learn to trust themselves, they can trust whether or not they can understand something they come into relationship with or something they come into contact with. And that's intuition. So to me, I think intuition can only be enhanced by knowledge, because intuition is something that you would use to guide yourself within a circumstance where you don't actually know, or you don't explicitly know what it is you're confronted with, but you have to trust what else you know inside of yourself in order to figure out how to engage this particular situation or this particular circumstance. So intuition is something that needs to be honed. But I think when you don't know who you are, how do you know if you can trust your own intuition? You see, if you don't know yourself, then how can you use your intuition effectively, right? And I think that's why that's what's facilitated in many of the within the context of African spirituality, and oftentimes that's why many of the religions they emphasize rationality, and they end up very dogmatic, because if there's not a logical linear line of thinking that enables them to come to an understanding, then if it's beyond understanding, then it's spooky, or it's what are the words they use? It's animism. It's something. It's something that you should be unsettled by. And I think because we're not trained to trust our own intuition, I think that's why people can use that intuition against us and drive us into fear and all other kinds of attitudes.
And how I would brother, was you done?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt, but what I would add to that and respond to that is that I don't think everybody can trust their intuition. I really don't. I think if you don't eat right, I think if you're plugged into the wrong media, if you're constantly absorbing Eurocentric media, toxic media, if you're not governing your thoughts, and if you're not oriented towards something righteous and positive and constructive, then your intuition is gonna be a function of where your brain is at and your spirit is at most of the time. So some people can trust their intuition, and I would say others, they need to look at somebody who looks like they got their shit together, and then they can trust their intuition. Trust your elders' intuition. Trust your great auntie who know how to cook and raise vegetables, and who's 95, and trust her intuition. But somebody who consumes toxic media all day long in an unthinking way and listens to commercials and is working just so they can buy a new pair of Balenciagas, I don't know if they can necessarily trust their intuition. And number two, we don't necessarily need to have our kids in a PWI for them to learn certain skills, but ain't nobody building the Golden Gate Bridge again without formal education. There's no book you can read, no source inside yourself where you can pull that out. You're going to need to know a lot more about metallurgy, about physics, about there's so many like higher level mathematics. Like our ancestors, the pyramid builders, they could probably do it. And if they had an institution of learning for us by which they could bestow their knowledge, then by all means we'd have to go and get it. But you ain't learning neurosurgery outside of a formal education environment in somebody's institution. Now, should it be controlled and ran by us, not just black faces like Ben Carson, but black people who love black people, who feel an affinity for black people, who are race people? Yes, that's the institution I want to recommend my kids go to. Yes, we did build bridges without formal education, but we didn't build the Golden Gate Bridge.
Well, I think also we have to understand, because a lot of times we idealize our ancestors, like they didn't have this, they didn't have this, they didn't do this. But the thing is that they were still mathematicians, they were still scientists. They didn't have the formal education that we consider formal education, but they were still educated in a sense of
it was an educational process,
right? It was an educational process, right? So in order to build that, that's why we're not able to do it now, because that education process, just like when we talk about Imhotep, they say he was the smartest, like he was a genius.
He was a multi-genius.
Right. Yeah. So we have to get from what we consider education, but then understand. That's why I asked the question, what is true education? Because we don't necessarily know what true education. And then Hannibal touched on a great point about intuition. So I know the person who asked that, they were talking about with children, because children tend to be, they tend to not be consumed with so much toxicity. But you have to understand that toxicity starts in the womb. So if your mother, and I'm getting to health, y'all know I love my health stuff, my holistic health. So, but when you're in the womb and your mother is absorbing toxicity, because remember, when a baby girl is born, she's born with all of her eggs. So she existed in her grandmother. And so if that grandmother absorbed toxicity, that toxicity is in that child. So there are stages and steps that you're going to have to take in order to kind of get that toxicity. And most people are not doing that. Most people are not trying to get that toxicity. There's a gut and a brain connection too. So that gut and that brain connection is what's going to help you with your intuition. So if you're not doing those things, and just like Hannibal said, the toxicity in the media, the toxicity in entertainment, the toxicity when we just walk out our door. We talked about racial battle fatigue, which is a real thing. When we walk outside our door, we are experiencing toxicity. We're constantly experiencing that. So, and then when we even talk about, not trying to like go off topic here, but when we even talk about that our thoughts are not our own, because people are putting those thoughts in us. Like even sometimes once you constantly think, if somebody told you you're ugly every day, and then your brain is going to morph yourself into thinking that you're ugly, even if you're the most gorgeous person in the world, that's not your thought. So we have to start unlayering all of these things that, and that is, Naeem Akbar talks about education. The first step of education is self-identity. So if y'all don't have anything to say to that, I do want us to get into that as far as identity and how important it is to identify and self-identify as self, but also as a collective.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it with the question, but I also think that to Chimoge's question earlier when he was asking children knowing things or having all of the knowledge inside of them before they become of age. I think that's ancestral knowledge, right? So knowledge in many ways is a form of of energy that can be transmitted, right? And I think that's what intuition is. You're tapping into knowledge that your ancestors had that can guide you in your actions without you having that knowledge for yourself. But I think that's why intuition is something that needs to be trained and honed. But I also believe that's why in when the more education you have, yes, intuition is cultivated, but it's cultivated through the acquisition of knowledge. You see, so like they say the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? But the thing is, the more you know, the better equipped you are to deal with what you don't know as well. So I think that's kind of the balance that we deal with, because no, I don't think any one person can know all there is to know, but I think one person can be trained in such a way where they can know enough to pull from and draw from in situations that they don't completely understand. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so self-identifying. So Hannibal, can you speak on the identity being the first step into education?
Well, when you were talking, you said self, but you also said in the collective.
Mm-hmm.
I want to stay there for a moment.
Okay.
I am what the old folks would call a race man. I took John Henrik Clarke's words to heart. I'm doing what I do best, and I always think about how I can use it to advance Black agendas, because I feel my presence within this collective of Black Americans and this contingent of the Black diaspora. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most detrimental modalities, detrimental dynamics that exists in Black American society is too many of us don't feel a part of the Black collective and don't feel that there is value in leaning into that collective and working from and for that collective. So, and a way of describing it is, they say, oh, we made it, man. We don't need all that rallying and organizing. Everything's, I get anybody, you can do it on your own. We don't need all this. I just got to go to college and get a degree. I'm going to get a good job and everything's going to be Gucci. That's not the case. That's why high income Black families don't have as much wealth as high income white families, because we have collective issues that we're approaching individually. We're ignoring the collective problems that require a collective solution. And we're ignorant to the fact that you're only here enjoying this level of comfort and access and convenience because Black people before you felt membership in the collective, felt duty to the collective, felt an obligation to reach as they climbed. Mm-hmm. And that's why I spazzed out on that other show, because bro wouldn't even be where he was if it wasn't for the work of Black people who felt a part of a collective. And we're not going to continue to be able to thrive as easily if too many of us drop our packs and say, I don't have to work on behalf of my brother and my sister no more. There's no need for our collective work. What is that? We getting close to Kwanzaa. What's that? Ujima, collective work. Somebody help me in the comments.
Collective work and responsibility.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a real damn thing, and it's the only reason why we're doing as well as we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurts me when I see Black folks who are just superficially Black, who don't feel Black in their heart, don't do Black things. Like you can tell by they got the same ideals, goals, aspirations, thoughts, mores, and modalities as they white counterparts. And it's okay to, live your life, be free. But just know that when you get into collective issues, right? When you get some of our collective issues, like being over policed, like going to the doctor. My dad taught 5th grade for 20 years. Okay? He's got advanced degrees. He's a homeowner, a taxpayer. And do you know that when he got cancer 5 years ago, they tried to do his biopsy without the proper sedations and pain precluders. They really made my dad endure a lot more pain than he had to endure. You know why? Because there are white and white adjacent college students, doctor students, and doctors who think that Black people can endure more pain than white people. They think our physiology is different, such that we can and don't need as much pain relievers. And that's the most racist and systemically racist and problematic things that comes out of racist Western medicine. Why did I bring that up? To say his education didn't prevent him from getting systemic racism in the hospital. The only thing that'll get rid of that is collective work. It's Black people who feel a part of a collective.
Mm-hmm.
Black people who say, I can't just worry about myself all the time. I know who I am. I know I came from greatness. I know I went through our people went through some trouble. The Ma'afa. I know we went through this. I know we're recovering from this, or we're trying to. But we can't stop working on behalf of our collective. Go ahead, man.
I think identity is like what you're saying. Like I think when we're talking about individual and collective, I don't think we can separate them, because I think our people face an identity crisis because we want to identify as everything except who we are as African people. We'd rather be American this, American that, Black versions of Europeans. We'd rather be Black versions of other people. We'd rather be slaves than be Africans. We'd rather be ADOS. Like our ancestors didn't have like a culture and an identity of their own when they were forced into those conditions. Slavery is the negation of who you are. It's not who you are. So I think what our people face is, if we can't even identify as who we are, how can we organize a collective body of our people to act on our behalf? And to me, I see that's why people have such a strong apprehension against Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is really the way that we as Black people unify. Many different groups on one common collective basis can create unification. So if people don't want to organize with other Black people, who do they want to organize with, right? They want to organize with our enemies. They want to organize with other groups of people who don't have our interests at heart. So we'll get used by the Jews and the NAACP for decades and decades and decades for them to advance themselves and their projects of citizenship, while we become science experiments in the courtrooms in the Civil Rights Act, right? So we'll do that and partner with them over and over and over without knowing our history, because we don't want to identify as ourselves and identify with our own people. And we don't want to create institutions with our own people. We'd rather participate in institution building with other people who already have the resources to build their institutions. So when they give us resources to build our institutions, Then when they pull the plug because we're doing our own thing and not their thing, then we wonder what happened and why the faucet tapped, right? So for me, that's why what attracted me to initially Malcolm X and Black nationalism was the same thing that attracted Marcus Garvey to Booker T. Washington, self-help. You know, like we need to get back together with our own people and organize our own people. But the problem is not enough of us have enough confidence in ourselves or in our own people. You know, a lot of us have a lot of excuses for why we won't, you know, help this Black institution, or why we don't want to support this project, or we don't like this kind of music, or we don't like this kind of music, or we have, and honestly, I really believe it has everything to do with religion. I think religion tells you how to relate. I think divinity tells you how to relate. When you see yourself as sacred and you see your own people as sacred, then you see yourself and your own people as capable. But if you see yourself as profane and you see your own people as profane, then why would you ever work with your own people? Why would you ever believe in yourself in being capable of doing or maximizing your own potential? So to me, I think all of these things in terms of us working together, they're based in our mind, and our mind is governed by what we know and what we think. So and what we know and what we think comes from, it always has a source. So if we're not honest about the source of our ideas or the source of the certain things that we believe, then how can we ever get ourselves straight and be ourselves? We're just going to continue to be Black versions of other people and never be able to get on the same page.
Right, because even when you said being Black versions of others, it's I see it as, you know, like John Henry Clark said, that you're I forgot that, I'm looking for the word, but copying, you're basically imitating. You're imitating them and they're imitating you. You know, and so honestly, that's insanity. You know, Dr. Wade Nobles talks about tornadoes of the mind. You know, so we're walking around insane because it's like trying to be like, it's like you, an adult, trying to be like a baby. You know, and the baby's trying to copy you, and you're trying to copy the baby. So you know, it's very detrimental because we are walking around kind of like insane people trying to copy people who, in essence, when you think about it, don't even really have a culture of their own. And so they copy and they pull even the English language, it pulls from all these different sources. That's why when people come over here, they have a hard time, sometimes having a hard time learning the English language, because the English language is not even it has so many different rules and exceptions.
It's like the Catholic Church. Everywhere they go, they pick up something new and add it.
Right. So I kind of do want to touch on that. I don't want to. So anybody, don't be triggered by this conversation, y'all. I hope y'all not being triggered, but well, I'm not going to tell you not to be triggered. I'm saying this might be a triggering conversation right now, because I do want to touch on what you said just a little bit. So can you go in depth a little bit, and Hannibal, you too, how does religion play a part in miseducation?
So I'm going to say a little bit about this, and then I'm going to use a little bit. And if we can, this is your show. Joanna Washington asked, she responded to, she said, how can we pull and make a multifaceted attack against that? Mm-hmm. In the spirit of solutions, I'd like to talk about that as at a certain point.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Religion is a factor that must be considered. It's not a private thing, especially when our kids are being required, and many times, to say every day that they pledge allegiance to a flag, blah blah blah, bull crap, under God, right? Who's God? Mm-hmm. The God that you like to quote, who said, "Slaves, obey your masters." The God that you pray to before you go on imperialistic wars to protect oil and other things. Like, so the thing is this: people's religious, I'm not anti-Christianity, I'm not anti-formal religion, but I am anti-manipulation. And a lot of people have been manipulated with religion, especially the big three, the monotheistic religions, which are really very similar, which is, it's weird that
All
they're
from the same place.
all Judeo-Christian, you know. Goddamn, Abraham is in all these books, but you know, I'm not anti-religion. I'm anti-manipulation. And religion has been used to manipulate, not all the time, but a lot. Historically and contemporary times, people are being manipulated by religion. There are people who are saying, there are people who are who are burning sage and being called demons, and then they're internalizing being called a demon and wondering if, you know, am I doing something wrong? And this mental confusion is slowing down their living. It is degrading their quality of life. It's getting in between them and the energy that they should be exerting on manifesting their destiny and raising their kids. Worrying about it burning incense for aroma's sake is too close to witchcraft, and so on and so forth. You know, so again, now I don't want to insult anybody's religion. I don't want to alienate anybody who I might be able to help somehow, but we can't ignore that religion has been used to manipulate people and to no positive, and it's not always to a positive end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't run away from this religion conversation at all, because I think it's the primary problem that we face as African people. I think the only way a minority group as small as white people can control so much of what they can control is through religion. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. And religion gives you your genealogy. It tells you what your original source is beyond what you can understand for yourself. So when people are talking about God, they're normally talking about their primordial father. So the thing is, when they're talking about their most distant fathers or their most distant ancestors, the question becomes, if you think of your most distant ancestor as a European or as an Arab, and you are a child of your ancestors, you're a child of your primordial mothers and fathers, and they are white or Arab, they're white, European, Arab, Asian, there's something other than what you are, then that's why you're going to run into contradictions, because your subconscious is disconnected from who you understand yourself to be consciously. So the thing is, I think what African people have gotten away from is the idea that we need to make ourselves sacred. Religion is the deification of a culture. There's a reason that Islam has a holy language and a holy land, right? Christianity has a holy language and a holy land. If those things do not belong to you and they cannot be substantiated by your history, then you've been disconnected from your own ancestors. You've been alienated from your own history and culture. And a lot of the time when it comes to religion, because they're so dogmatic, they're supposed to be dogmatic. It's the only way that lies can stay in place, if people will believe them without interrogating them. That's what dogma's for. So for me, I think religion is the prison that cages our minds. I think anything that's alien to African people, anything that was imposed and inflicted upon our people, has to be interrogated. And normally we either don't have the courage to interrogate that, or we find excuses to kind of like work around that. You know, oh, we're not going to deal with that one. You know, like, oh, we're going to leave that one to the wayside and hope everything else gets resolved. But then when you think about it, nations Like I think what happens when we live in a secular society or a society where there's a distinction between church and state is people don't always recognize that we live like nations and religions go hand in hand. So normally if you said what your religion was, it would tell me something about what nation you come from and what people you come from. But because we've been living here in the United States and we've been living in almost a suspended reality from our own continuity, then what happens is we can't resolve our own contradictions. So for me, I think religion is one of the most important things. I think Francis Welsing says to accept consciously or subconsciously the image of God as a white male or a white man is the highest form of self-negation and lack of self-respect. So I mean, there's no way around it, in my opinion. You have to deal with the religion problem head on, and that's how we inherit all of their worldviews. That's how we inherit their perspectives. That's how we inherit their values. That's why we treat each other the way we treat each other. Like it's through religion. Like religion is how we learn all of these things without recognizing that's how we learn them. To me, there's no difference between church and school. There's no difference.
Yeah, I was just about to touch on that. Hannibal, did you have something to say?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, brother, I don't necessarily disagree with too much of that. I will say this though. You and I both share the fact that we was kind of activated by the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
I can't throw religion completely out of the window when I know that the most important man in my life, aside from my father, came out of religious tradition. That's Malcolm X. Like we wouldn't have a Malcolm X if it wasn't for the Nation of Islam.
I disagree.
I disagree on that too.
Really?
We wouldn't have Malcolm X if it wasn't for the continuity of our ancestors who brought Malcolm X to where he was. So the way I see it is that's not the result of any kind of Arab religion. The Arab religion was something that was in his environment. Now the thing is, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam understood the problem of religion, and they understood that the problem of Christianity was it was the white man's theology to promote themselves and their domination over other people. Now they understood that they needed their own theology, their own religion, and they set out to make their own religion. Now the well that they drew from was I would argue they didn't go deep enough into our African history to understand that what they were drawing upon was something that had enslaved African people for centuries before Christianity even entered the picture. So I think what happens is when we deal I honestly believe that the thing about Malcolm X is he was not a dogmatic personality. I think he was constantly evolving. His ideas were constantly renewed when he was engaging with new people. He traveled, and ultimately I see Malcolm X as a Pan-Africanist before I care about him being a Muslim. I mean, he was a Muslim. Garvey was a Christian. But do we value Garvey because he was a Christian, or do we value him because of what he did for our people?
Well, to be clear, I don't know if you heard me say we wouldn't have Malcolm X. I said if it weren't for the Nation of Islam. I didn't say Islam. I said the Nation of Islam.
Oh, it's an organization, sure, but that's one
exactly.
of many.
But the thing is, you can't have the Nation of Islam without Islam. I honestly,
other organizations.
Let me ask you this. If the Nation of Islam didn't exist, right? Malcolm X is sitting in prison. Who's talking to him? Because his brothers wrote him, his brothers who were already in the nation wrote him about Islam and about Elijah Muhammad and the nation. And then brothers in the nation who are in the prison already were talking to him. If he didn't have brothers in the nation, if he didn't have nation members in prison with him, who would have been talking to him?
Someone else. I mean, the way I see it, I really think that, like, sometimes when we look back and reflect on our history, I think we have to recognize that history is a bit more messy than we give credit for. There sometimes, just because people make it in the history books, sometimes we overlook the people who did not make it into history books. So what I mean is, when the UNIA fell apart or became a splinter or fracture, there were other organizations that were formed as a result of that. So the UNIA continued, the Nation of Islam was started. You have the African Nationalist Pioneers Movement with Carlos Cooks. You know, you have many different organizations. So the way I see it is, the sentiments of Black nationalism are not. I don't think we can start in 1920 or 1930 or 1940 when we're talking about the genealogy of what produces people like Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X, whether it wasn't him or whether it was someone else, that genealogy existed and other people were a part of it and continued to be a part of it. So Malcolm X is one of the most prolific of those personalities, but I'm not going to give that credit to exclusively the Nation of Islam. I mean, there's too many other influences in Malcolm X's life.
Fair
I mean,
enough.
I respect the contributions of brothers in the Nation of Islam, but I will not put one group above all others. I won't do that.
Okay. And I agree with that, because just knowing that the seeds were planted from even when he was younger and he was attending those UNI meetings with his father. So that was I'm gonna kind of go, because we are getting to the top of the hour. So I want to give a chance to talk. I want a chance for us to talk about solutions, but also tying that in to uh tying religion in, because when we learn these, when you think about it, these Abrahamic religions and then the European names, and then people saying that the Bible is a history book. So we're not only learning history through the Bible or through religion, but also in education. The same, it's the same. It's through that whiteness, seeing them as the victors. Because most of us, and I had this conversation the other day, most of the time we are not looking at when we close our eyes, there you say Jesus, there's an image that pops up. When you hear Paul or Peter, those are images that pop up. And so these people are seen as holy, they're seen as being the victors in our mind. And then also when you talk about the Egyptians, they were kind of the bad people, and they were bad in the Bible. So it was, so that is something that comes from religion, but it's also very much a part of education. So speaking of how that corresponds with us learning them being the victors in our mind, and the only thing that we kind of grab, we get the Harriet Tubmans, we get the Martin Luther Kings. They don't even speak, in the education system, they don't even really speak about Malcolm X. You have to kind of do your own studying with that or get it in higher education. So how does that, speak on that as far as history through whiteness, and how are we experiencing our whole world through whiteness? Are we in essence just white people with black face?
I don't think we are. I think even when we inherit ideas, or we've been forced into ideas that other people have put on us, I don't think it makes us into those people. I think what it does is it causes us to have contradictions, to exist in contradictions. I think it causes contradictions in our intentions and our actions. I think that's what ends up happening. I think we try to work for our own people, but we are guided and governed by something else that pulls us in other directions. So that's why I think I mean, for as much as I love Malcolm X, I don't hear him having a severe critique of Arab settler colonialism and imperialism in North Africa, because he saw their political struggle and their history from their purview, because he inherited the Arabs' purview through his religion. So he saw their fight with the Western Europeans as part and parcel of the fight that African people have with European colonizers. I mean, Marxists have the same orientation. They think that Arabs are allies. You know, Kwame Nkrumah thought that Gamal Nasser was an ally. Gamal Nasser tried to create an Arab state between Egypt and Syria. Syria is not in Africa at all, but that's one state that he was trying to create. He's an Arab. He's an Arab. There's no difference between Arabs in Kemet, calling it Mazir or Egypt, and Europeans, Anglo-Saxons, calling this the United States. There's no difference. Just like there's no difference with the Boers in South Africa, or the Jews in Israel, the Israelis. There's no difference between them and being Palestine, and basically the Arabs being in the ancestral lands of African people. I don't see a difference. But I don't think Malcolm X or many of the many others who may have inherited the perspective of Arabs would even see that perspective. They wouldn't even see Arab slavery, Arab imperialism, Arab settler colonialism as a problem, you know, because we're here in the Western world, or well, not Western world. I mean, we're here in, well, it is the Western world, it's the extension of it, in the United States, where the primary state religion is Christianity. So it's very clear that Christianity is a problem, because we see directly who the people who are doing what they're doing to us. We can see how that we deal with that here. But when we look across the world in Africa, you know, that's when our ideology, our theory, our philosophy, that's when it has its most significant ramifications for how we interpret the things that are distant from us. How do we interpret the distant past? How do we interpret our history? So if we don't understand that we have a philosophy or an ideology that aligns us with our own ancestors, then what happens is we get dislocated, and we start to we have a series of hits and misses, right? We can explain ourselves, but we can't explain ourselves sufficiently. We can explain our past, but we can't explain our past sufficiently, right? So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
For me, so you were saying, like, are some of us dark-skinned whites, right?
Right.
Sorta.
Yeah.
And the thing is, here's the thing, racially, this is what a lot of people miss about race. It's a continuum it's a dynamic that has one is partially how your environment interacts with you, and it's also how you view yourself and interact with the environment. So an example of what I mean by that is you can walk around being the color of midnight, saying I'm not black, but everybody who sees you is going to say you are. So it again, like, race is a construct, but it's real, just like time is a construct. Space-time is a construct, and it's not just how we describe ourselves or feel about ourselves. So here's the thing. If you walk around rejecting your blackness, just saying I'm a human or I'm an American, and I don't have to make racial considerations with my actions, you're going to end up, you know, you're going to end up missing the mark and performing suboptimally. You're going to end up inviting people into an unsafe space that's unsafe because of racial dynamics, but you're too busy trying to be a human with your white mind, that you're misdiagnosing the problem. And if you can't diagnose the problem, you can't solve it. And a lot of our problems, again, are collective, and they are racial in nature. And unless you have a black mind and approach it in a black way, you're not going to be able to solve it. That's just the long and the short of it. And being white-minded is a real thing. It's a very real thing.
Yeah, I always say the first step we have to do now is to kill that little white man inside of us. And people get mad when I say that. A lot of black men get mad when I say that. But I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about everyone. We need to kill that little black man inside of us, because when our first moments, we're indoctrinated at a very young age. We're indoctrinated as soon as we come out of the womb. And even take away religion, and Hanifa touched on it. It's not religion as much as the problem, but it's what's done with it. And so it's kind of like, even if you are a woman and you're being a woman, is nothing wrong with being a woman, but it's like, if you are using it for manipulation, that's a huge problem. So those are some things that we have to touch on, because the conversation that we're having is about education, and we have been miseducated. I think most of us can agree that we have been miseducated, misguided. And so now we have to get to our children, because our children are in the future. And so what do we do? Do we completely remove ourselves from their systems? But if we can't, so I know some people say that they have to put their children in public school. If we can't, then what is the solution there?
So here's the thing. Ideally, yes, remove ourselves, complete independence. But here's the thing. That's not realistic. What is realistic is to say this: until we get a critical mass institutionally, until we get critical mass in education, in medicine, in the legal system, in business, in commerce, finance, farming, etc., what we have an opportunity to do is be the spook who sat by the door. You can go and work for a Google with your IT education, and you can just be a blind cog in the wheel doing what they tell you to do and cashing checks. Or you can go work for Google like the spook who sat by the door and say, let me observe these processes. Let me observe these systems of checks and balances. Let me make notes so that I can take this from here and go apply it on my own company or in a Black-owned company for the benefit of Black people. So I think of it as like an insurgency. We have an opportunity to be insurgents. We can get paid to learn skills and institutional and organizational management in their systems. But if you have your Black mind and you're doing it in a Black way, then you can take those skills and those experiences, save you a little piece of money, and then go apply it in a Black way. That's how I look at it. Because if you think about it, like, how a lot of us like to say, oh, Black-owned businesses, I be having any bad experiences with Black-owned businesses. Half of the thing is, like, we want to do for ourselves, but we have never worked in a small business and observed what it takes to run a small business.
Mm-hmm.
And, a boy who grows up working for his dad's family-owned business of 4 employees, and they do $200,000 of revenue every year. It's a small business, but he's going to observe how to run the business, how to manage accounts receivable, how to manage accounts payable, how to do inventory sourcing, et cetera, et cetera. We sometimes just start a business with no background and no experience and no training and no nothing, just the will and the desire to do our own thing, but we haven't learned or observed what it took. So I say, if you can get it without being in the system, then get it without being in the system. But if you got to be in the system, just don't be a mindless slave. Go in there, be a spy, be an insurgent, be the spook who sat by the door. Take everything you can from them. Exploit them. Don't let them exploit you. Does that make sense?
Hey, if you're gonna be the spook, you can't go stay over there. Nobody lives behind enemy lines. You have
but the spook who sat by the door worked for the. You seen it. You read the book. I know you read the book. You read the book, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. He worked for the CIA for 4 short years, and then he left.
He didn't stay. That's my point. He didn't stay,
and that's what I said. I said go work for them, and then leave, and then go apply it in the Black space.
because I know I had a professor. We call him the bench warmer because he's not really worthy of being a professor, but he calls himself the spook who sat by the door because he's like, yeah, we up here in these white universities, da, 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 da. And you know what? I have no illusions about where I go to school and how schools are still plantations because they're not our institutions. I don't have any illusions about that. Some people pretend to be the spook who sat by the door so that as a defense mechanism. And I would say if you're going to be the spook who sat by the door, then you're building your home base so you can ultimately go home and be with your people, and your people can exist independently of the people who they are now dependent on. So I'm all for the spook who sat by the door. I just also understand people use that as a veil,
Right. Like you can't be the spook who sat by the door and you just put 20 years.
Like, yeah, man, I've been over here for 20 years. I'm the spook who sat by the door. I'm an insurgent. But you
right.
But you
got tenure.
would you build outside of their institution for your people? I mean, I'm not saying people can't do both. They can't do many things. I'm not saying that. You can do many things, but do many things. Sometimes people pretend like they're doing many things when they're really only doing one. So, I mean, I know people like to play like they can do both, and some people can, but you have to be honest with yourself about where your loyalties and where your dedication lies. And if your dedication is to your people, then I think your actions will speak for themselves, and you won't have to call yourself who's the spook who sat by the door. You know what I mean? I mean, some people, I think people who are the spook who sat by the door, they don't run around telling people, I'm the spook who sat by the door. You know what I mean?
Right. They don't give away their position.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So a lot of times when we're talking about this, as far as like the being in the school system, and we talk about the child being a lot of times we hear that the parents are to blame for their child not doing well in school. And one thing that I do think about is it kind of reminds me of the conversation I heard yesterday with the elder Baba Kaba, and he was talking about how he was actually talking about Simone Biles. But I remember when my daughter was in gymnastics, and the gymnast teacher, she was saying, well, Black girls tend to be more powerful than their counterparts. So they're more powerful. They when it comes to gymnastics, and we see that in most sports, that Blacks tend to be more powerful. But one thing that he was talking about is how they had to change the game once Simone Biles. So now they penalize her because the other ones can't do the same thing that they do. So it got me to thinking about in education, how our brains are functioning differently. Or the question is, are our brains functioning differently? And if they're functioning differently than our white counterparts, because I know, especially with people on the actual continent of Africa, when they come over here to the United States, they usually excel. And even in other cultures, they tend to excel. And it seems like even especially in Nigeria, they have a lot of people who come there, and they're creating like new technology. So, and when they are even explaining the brother who I don't know if y'all are familiar with the guy Goot, but the theorem, not theory, but the actual theorem, that the formula for the God formula, that's what it's called. It's GAGUT. So we can have that's a whole another conversation. But when he breaks it down, and it's very complex, right? Like it's supposed to surpass Albert Einstein's theory. So it's supposed to surpass that. But when he breaks it down in a way that is anybody can almost anybody can understand. So it just makes me think that our brains are processing information differently, but because we're in their European system and it's not meant for us, then we are looked at as you know, a lot of our children are looked at as being slow or not as, you know, not smart, or they're dumb. So do you think it is actual that our brains are processing information differently, we're thinking differently, or is it more of lack of parental guidance and just the system, or just the system the system itself?
We can't absolutely point at either. It's not an either or. It's
Okay.
definitely a little bit of both and some other things. You know, we have, and I'm not leveling what I'm about to say at you, but people have a tendency to want to oversimplify their analysis of a problem and also the solution. There are inherent differences between our children's physiology and brain than other people's children. If anybody is a student of Dr. Amos Wilson, he talks about how, I don't remember which book, brother Emo, if you know, you can chime in, but he has a book where he talks about how the speech capabilities of Black children manifest themselves way earlier than any other child on the planet. More often than not, the speech capabilities are far superior in the babies and the youngest kids than any other people. And this speaks to the ancientness of our DNA. Black people are the oldest people on the planet. What that means in scientific terms is that we've had the longest time for natural selection and evolution to act on our DNA chains. That's why we excel in so many areas. And usually when you see areas where we're lacking, there are environmental factors like lead. I'm in Chicago. There are 700 or 800,000 water service lines that are made out of lead. And when I heard NPR talking about this 2 years ago, they said the city only had a plan for fixing 800 of them over the next 12 to 18 months. So they're going to tackle almost 1 million lead water service lines, 100 at a time. Here's the issue. Lead water, new brain, destruction. Many children's cognitive abilities have been impaired by simply consuming lead water. So you can start with a magnificent brain, drink a bunch of lead water, and your brain power be degraded. So you got nature, you got nurture, you got environment, you got hereditary factors. There's just so much at play.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot at play, and I think too, Sister Mott, one of the things that you said was I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question? You repeat your question again, so I can see if I can.
So just the concept of it being kind of the parents to blame, or is it just, you know, the system that we belong to? Are we thinking differently? Are we processing things differently? But is their system? It's meant for them. So is it more of that we're processing differently than they do, and so we're perceived as being slower or dumber than them?
Okay, got it. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was very profound, Baba James Small, one of the things that he said is I thought it was pretty powerful. It was pretty powerful. He says we don't recognize ourselves when we look in the mirror. Right. So I think the example I would use is Ebonics, like language, the way we speak to each other. I think, you know, I know within my family, if I use the word Ebonics in a room full of people in my family, it becomes a joke. Like they don't think it's actually a language. They think like, oh, Ebonics, yeah, I bet this is Ebonics too, like, and they start cutting up and all these things. But I think I understand, that I understand why people don't always understand, right? People haven't necessarily researched or studied these kinds of things. But I think what happens is when we speak, or the way we speak, or our languages sometimes carry logics, right? They carry I guess value systems that are germane to a culture, to our culture. So the thing is sometimes we think in ways that are germane to our culture, and that's why we arrange the words the way we do, right? And that's what Ebonics is. But I think what happens is, because we don't recognize ourselves when we look in the mirror, we don't know who we are as African people. Sometimes we exist in exile of ourselves. Sometimes we contradict ourselves, and we get into conflicts with each other about who we are, and about things that we don't recognize are outgrowths of who we are. You see, so I think a lot of that is at play. So that's at play when we're dealing with each other. But when we go to schools, or when we go in, I mean, it's not only school. When we interface with racists and Europeans or other groups of people who don't understand our culture, I think if we don't know who we are, then, and they say something about us, then we don't know how, sometimes, I mean, if it's negative, we know automatically not true, right? But I think when people say things about us and we don't know who we are, we don't know what we should accept and what we should decline, what we should reject and what we should accept. So I think that's so, and I think that becomes clarified when we talk about what a system is, or who and what is the system. To me, I think that's why I answered the question differently than Brother Hannibal when you said, "Are we black?" What would you ask? Are we black? Are we black?
Or we white with black face?
Are we white with black face? See, I answered the question differently, because when I think of the system, I don't think the system exists beyond white people. White people are the system. Now you have black people who participate in that system, or align themselves with white people, but white people to me are the system. Not capitalism, white people, right? Like I don't think I think white people are the system. So if we're not white people, if we're who we are, then that means what culture system, what matrix, or what system are we operating within? But we don't always appreciate or recognize our own cultural matrix, our own culture. We don't appreciate who we are. We don't appreciate our own systems, right? We don't know what our own systems are sometimes. We don't recognize whether we're a part of them or not, because we don't know exactly what they are. So I think what we need to do is get clarity on who we are. And I think, part of the political process of us getting free is completely understanding who the system is, or who they are. Because for me, as a history major, when I was learning all this history, I didn't learn a whole lot about African history. So I became very familiar and adept at identifying what European ideas are and who Europeans are, but I didn't know who African people were. So, I mean, we're not the opposites of them. We're something completely independent of them. So we need to study our own history and culture to understand who we are, without thinking of ourselves strictly in relationship to Europeans or other people. I hope that answered something of the question.
Yeah. Hannibal, what did you have to say?
And speaking of your question, part of your question was about the parents, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about parents, because it's a lot of parents in the room, I'm sure, and I hope a lot of parents see this. Let me tell you what I heard in a meeting of teachers one day. I haven't been able to get in touch with his mom. He's still doing the same 10 off, 1 on. What 10 off, 1 on means is the boy don't go to school for 10 days. He comes to school on the 11th day, then he ain't seen again for 10 days. Because if he missed 11 days, he'd be expelled. Now, guess what his mom says? I let him, a 7th grade boy, 13 years old, make his own decisions. If he wants to go to school, he can go to school. Well, what's he doing when he's not at school? Playing video games. What? So let's talk about the parents. We have a parent here who is allowing her 13-year-old, her non-contributing 13-year-old, to not go to school, right? But still, he gets to play video games. This is one of the most problematic behaviors I've seen parents do with kids within this context of education. They are letting kids who don't do well academically, who are struggling, who are demonstrating that they do not understand the material, still be rewarded, still have their phone, still socialize, still play video games, still do what they want. And I'm trying to figure out why in the F is that? Does that make sense to anybody? Why does that make sense to anybody? Why is the parent more concerned about being liked by their child? There are a lot of parents who would rather be liked and be their kid's friend than to be a paternal authoritarian. When it's time to be an authoritarian, lay down that law, say your job is to be a student, and your job is to master these, to pick up whatever skills you can pick up and learn these mathematics and learn how to be a more effective communicator. Because at the end of the day, we can strip away the history class, we can strip away the indoctrination, we can strip away all that problematic bullcrap. If our kids don't know how to calculate, don't know the basics of calculation, don't know the basics of grammar and the written word, and don't, like reading, writing, and arithmetic are really the basics. Reading, and writing. Reading is the taking in new information. Writing is a communication, and math is the basis of calculation. Whether we're talking finance, whether we're talking chemistry, whether we're talking architecture. Letting a child stay home and not learn is child abuse in my mind. Letting a child play video games when they're failing is child abuse in my mind. So again, like I said, it's a multifaceted problem. Do we got different brains? Yes. Do we got different socioeconomic conditions? Yes. Some people got cleaner water than others? Yes. But are some people letting their kids do whatever the F they want to do? Yes, they are. To their child's detriment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, well, what did Frances Walton say? She says, children can't raise children, right? So like, she was saying there's no way that a teenager can raise a child to full adult maturity. And I think oftentimes, I mean, from my experience working in many of the schools that I work with, what you realize is a lot of these kids, they go to school, they're trying to figure it out for themselves. And we understand that they're a victim of their circumstances when they're kids. And somehow when they turn 18, they become responsible for everything that they're not doing right. You see what I mean? Like, it's almost like overnight sometimes. Like it's like when you're in school, when you're in high school, you're 17 years old, it's not your fault. But as soon as you turn 18, it's your fault. I'm not saying it's a question of people not being accountable. I think what it is sometimes we don't recognize what it is that it takes for people to stand on their own 2 feet, right? And I think when people aren't going to school, some people, I've had students that they literally come to school to go to sleep, right? Because they work in night jobs, 16, 15 years old. they work a night job. Some of them in the street. I know in Jersey, some of them was 13 years old taking cars. To me, that doesn't tell me that the kid is dumb. That tells me the kid has a lot of gusto. You know what I mean? He's ready to do a lot more than a lot of other people. But at the same time, he's not using his energies in a constructive fashion, right? So I think what happens is, if they're not gonna go to school, then what are they gonna do, right? I think that's and I think that's why we kind of get back to, at least where I tried to start. I really do believe that the solution for African people is African people socializing and educating our own children. So I think a lot of the time the homeschooling model is really the best place to start. I'm not saying it's the ultimate solution, but I think for those who have the strategic position, because I understand everybody can't homeschool, but I think for those who have the base of knowledge in order to pass that to their children and control the socialization of their children, they should. For those who understand the problem, I think those people need to work in coordination to build larger institutions to alleviate the pressures off of people who can't solve this problem for themselves. So I really, but to me that comes down to a question of nationalism, like Black nationalism. If we're talking about controlling our own institutions, then that's what we have to be about. We have to build the institutions for people to participate within. Marcus Garvey basically said, well, where are your men of affairs? Where are your captains of industry? And as Dr. Clark says, when Garvey couldn't find them, he set out to make them, right? So I think to me, that's what leadership is. That's, people understanding what the problem is and creating a path, creating a doorway for other people to walk through.
What a great segue to the solutions part, right, Maat?
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about. I want to go back to Joanna's question. Hopefully she's still here. Pulling money together as an attack. So touch on that for us, Hannibal.
So we were talking about that within the conversation of poor medical care. Now, I would put forth, and there are studies that would echo this, that there is a lot of racialized medical care in the system. The reason why it's persisted is because it hasn't been attacked aggressively. Now, why? Well, the people who are on the receiving end of this malpractice and miscare are us, the people with the least resources, at least the least aggregated resources. Okay. And here's the thing, what a lot of people don't understand. There's no profit component to the solution of this problem. All right. And because there's no profit component, it makes it that much harder to tackle. Now, when you tackle these issues, it pretend we had all the resources. This is what it would look like. It would be a multifaceted attack, multifaceted solution. There'd be a legal arm, an educational arm, and a major marketing arm. This is how things get done in this country. You call attention to the problem with your marketing campaigns. And I'm talking aggressive, radio, TV, social media, everywhere, YouTube, partnerships with popular media outlets, and you aggressively call attention to the issue. This is what the LGBTQ community been doing for the last 10, 15 years. Okay, they have a major marketing arm, multiple organizations that are doing the marketing for these things. They have a legal team. They have legal teams. They have legal entities that are putting lawsuits here and lawsuits there. And so if we were doing this against for the issue of medical apartheid, we'd be suing all kinds of hospitals left and right. And we would also be engaged in targeted studying, gathering data, so we can use the data to highlight the instances of medical malpractice, medical apartheid, because the doctors are saying we didn't do anything. The doctors are saying it just happens. And we're saying no. Just like with Serena Williams, she didn't get the right care when she was having her baby, and she almost lost her life and the baby's life. And it was because she was getting the nigga treatment. So you got the legal part of the attack, the marketing part of the attack, and the educational part of the attack. And because all these things cost money and are not generating money inherently, then you have a financial arm of the attack. This is what I say when you have a collective mind frame, when you know who you are and you know you're Black and you love Black people and you love your Black self, and you have a Black issue that you can identify through your Black lens, your Black worldview, then you can get together with Black people who know these things and put together the money and the plan that and know that it's going to take years. We be trying to solve the problem in one summer.
Right.
Like, oh, George Floyd summer. After these protests, we're going to have racial justice. No. No, it takes years. So that's what I meant in the response to Joanna or whoever asked that question. That's what I mean by having a collective mind frame that motivates us to pool our resources and do the collective work that it takes to address this complicated issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I also don't think we need to save the world. I think we find our corner of the world and chip away at it. You know, I think sometimes people get caught up in, oh, well, what about everybody? Well, what about everybody? What about everybody else? And I really do believe that, like, if we build institutions, then you will be able to create community. And I think that's the best we can hope for. That's the best we can ask for. And I think as people do that, where they find themselves, wherever we find ourselves, if we build community and build institutions, then I don't think we have to worry about saving the world, because we're equipping our own people with the ability to save ourselves. You see what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The heart don't do the lungs work. The heart does the heart's work.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we need to do. And that's why I also say, like, I'm not interested in working on, like, you're not going to see me spending time and energy worrying about oil spills. You know, that's not my area of expertise. That's not my area of interest. Unless they spilling oil directly on the west or the south side of Chicago, you know, then I'm not. There's other people working on that, you know.
Yeah. Or unless we create an empire like Haiti, we could send people to other countries to fight. But, you know, that's something else. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
Yeah. Oh, and we got to learn how to talk about these things and together in unity, because when, you know, we're the only group who, when we start talking about Black issues and then we become racist.
You
know, the Mexicans can talk about Mexican issues, and that's just their cultural stuff, you know.
Right.
So as soon as we start saying, well, Black people getting a certain kind of treatment in these hospitals, we need to worry about that. You know, oh no, let's talk about all people's medical outcomes. No, everybody's house ain't on fire right now. We don't have to worry about all houses. Our house is on fire. We worried about our house.
Right. I worry about the image that I see in the mirror, and the images of my children, the images of my husband. Like that's my first priority, and they're Black, so that's the I'm worried about that first. That is my first priority. And I think that what happens is that we are taught, is back to that indoctrination. We're taught to be more concerned with because we see them as the victors. So we also look at them as we're them. It's kind of like what you said, Brother Emo, about Professor Small saying we don't even know our own image. And so in that dissonance that we have within ourselves, because it's not, you're looking at yourself, you see yourself, but you don't love yourself, and you also don't, and therefore you don't love the other person that looks like you either. And so we constantly are fighting for other people, but we we don't even know how to even fight for ourselves or even trust one another to do the work as a collective. And it was something in the chat that I wanted to touch on, but I do want to continue to talk about solutions here. So when it comes to education and it comes to what we're talking about in building with the community, how do we link education to building within the community, and we have more of that village mindset? Because someone in the chat did touch on that. They touched on how we work together to educate the child. So the only issue that I kind of have with that is, if we are, us as adults are educating these children, do we need to first self-identify and have that identity, because we have an identity crisis? So I know we're having this conversation. So it's those like us that we kind of have already self-identified, and even you changing your name. So what is the process? What does that process look like so that it is more for the community? And I understand everyone can't be saved. But as a community aspect, if we said us and everybody in this chat wanted to get together right now and build that community, starting with educating ourselves and self-identifying, what would those steps look like?
Well, I really do believe it begins with building community, and what that means from my perspective, on my personal perspective, is choosing who you build relationships with. You know, people you trust, people who you are your friends, become part of your family, right? You know, I think it starts at home, starts with your family. And I don't mean that in a narrow way, in a narrow sanguilineal or blood based way. I mean, when we build family, I mean that's honestly what I love about Afrocentricity International. I didn't know many of those people, and I really consider them my family now. You know, and I think that's the kind of answer we're looking for. When we see each other as family, then we will act together on one accord, right? And something Brother Hannibal said earlier. You know, would you say that you said the heart and the stomach don't have the same function?
Right. I said the heart don't try to do the stomach's job, and the stomach don't try to do the heart's job.
Yeah. So if everybody in the family has their given occupation, their job, their role, what they do, and you guys work in concert, you work together as a family, then what happens is, you know, families working in concert with other families, you know, produce ultimately, you know, well, here in the United States, I mean, you have to move aside the nation that does exist to produce a nation, which is another issue. But to me, that's what a nation is. A nation is an amalgamation of families. So if your family has these people doing these things, and we're all working together, and you work with someone else's family, then I think that's when things become practical. That's when things become tangible. And when things become tangible for people, I think you'll find less and less people have excuses, and more people will be willing to participate, you know, and join and build upon what it is that you're already building. So I really do think it's about leadership. I don't think it's about saving the community. I think it's about us saving ourselves and setting the example, trailblazing for people who need to understand or would like to understand. Because you can only help people who are willing. You know, it's like you can't jump in the water after somebody who's drowning. You know, you can, but at the risk of drowning yourself. You know, what you do is you throw them a lifeline. So what we do is we need to build our boats so that we can throw as many lifelines as possible, instead of jumping in the water and sinking to the bottom and nothing ever got built to begin with, right? So I hope that answers in some way.
Yeah, so how do we combat people who are coming to be destructive, even if they look like us? So not even talking about white people, but just people who look like us, who we perceive as being one of us, and we know that that has happened a lot historically. So how do we combat that?
You know, somebody made a comment earlier in the chat not too long ago. They said we're talking about these issues, and you know, I had mentioned there's a money component. We need money to do some of this work, and somebody said, I don't think the money is the problem. I think it's because it's not sexy enough, and there's not another culture propelling. I want to focus on the it's not sexy enough. That is here's how I interpret that. They don't have the spiritual motivation to choose this allocation of the funds over another one. Okay, they don't have the spiritual motivation. Dr. Marimba Ani, who is a genius in her own right, she said that all things in within the canon of African spirituality, within the construct of African spirituality, all things are spirit. And everything you see in the physical world is just a manifestation of the spirit. Now, here's how I define spirit for this conversation. You can't touch it. If it's mental, if it's emotional, it is in a way spiritual. So our desire is spiritual. Our philosophies are spiritual. Our bias is spiritual. And the thing is, like she said, a lot of people just aren't spiritually in alignment with fighting for the community. Like there are plenty, like she said, money isn't always the problem. There's lots of Black people who have aggregated resources, but you know, they don't have the spiritual motivation to choose forming an organization that fights medical apartheid over buying a Bentley. To them, the choice is clear. I want a Bentley, and if I can get a Bentley, then you Negroes can get a Bentley. And so I ain't going to put this $100,000 into this, forming this organization that could make transformational that can transform the medical industry. We have to start with the spirit. It's easy for me to make decisions that are Black centric because I goddamn love Black people. And I you know, it's not nothing that I have to try to do. It starts with my orientation. So we have to stoke that fire. We have to give that love to the kids. And that's part of education, right? We give that love to the kids such that that spiritual motivation, when they get access to resources or they get a place of position, the spiritual motivation causes them to make the decisions and allocate resources for the betterment of the group. Okay, we can start. If look, it gotta be sexy to love your people. We have to make it sexy. We have to appeal. We have to spend money on the marketing, that it takes to affect minds, just like these other assholes who are competing for our attention and for our mental space. They're like, they want us to do is buy stuff and make subscriptions to whiteness. And they're willing to spend money to do that. We have to be willing to spend money to get our kids to love Black people so much that they make Black decisions.
Yeah, we need propaganda for ourselves.
Fucking right we do.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we need. And we need people to not shrink from the word propaganda. Just because its connotations are unsavory doesn't mean that's not what we absorb every day.
No, Garvey was a propagandist. The Panthers had
We're
propaganda.
surrounded by propaganda constantly. It's just that their motivation is base. They just want you to buy something.
Right.
They just want you to make subscriptions to the Eurocentric way, which is selfish and materialistic and empty and dead. We have to start with the spirit. That's the component that we've been missing. And that's the most African shit that's been said since we started talking. Is it not? Right. Who's saying I'm lying? I dare you. I am not.
And so it was a conversation that I was listening to the other day about nature is spirit. So I mean, just talking about what you're saying about spirit and understanding that component about how we're connected to nature. So we have removed ourselves because that's the European way, right? Like they go and destroy everything, every part of nature, and we have followed suit in that, just like we have followed suit in a lot of things. So what about those that don't have the resources? So, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So there's a lot of people who have lost their jobs. So how do we build resources with one another so that we can properly educate ourselves and build at the same time and do all these things? Because, you know, we're behind. So we have to do all these things simultaneously. We don't really have time to like work on one thing at a time. We have to kind of do all of these things at the same time. So what about people who don't have the resources, or how do we start building collectively with people who have less than others?
Well, building collectively offsets having less.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point. Like a finger can't topple. You can't knock you can't knock your opponent out with your finger, but you knock your opponent. You bring your fingers together. You make a fist. You hit him with that fist. Bam. You know, that's what, when you don't have the resources individually, then you collectively, you pool the resources and deploy those resources to the problem. But here's the thing, again, we're back. I'm going to take it back to the spirit. We can't do that as much because we don't have unity. And we don't have unity because a lot of times we don't have trust. We don't trust one another. And sometimes we don't have trust for one another because we're so busy starving away at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that sometimes we steal from our neighbors instead of loving our neighbors. And because we steal from our neighbors sometimes, and they know that we done stole, then when we come to the door and say, hey, let's pool our resources, let's do something collectively, they're like, ain't you the motherfucker that just stole from me the other day? I'm not working with you. The trust is the glue that holds it all together. Trust is spirit. You can't put your finger on trust. You can't buy it from the store. You just have to behave in a trustworthy fashion, and then you will be trusted, and then you can get together and build. And then it don't matter if you only got $20, because she got 100 and she got 1,000, and we've all demonstrated trust, and we got together and we tackled our collective issue in a collective way instead of being individuals who don't have resources and are not making the fists.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You sound like you had a thought.
Yeah, it was just more of creating. So if we create a code where okay, so you just talked about like that person, like if that person stole from you, and understanding kind of that why people steal and all that, because they don't have what they need. But do we create a code within our collective where if someone does something like stealing or whatever it may be, to ostracize or remove that person from the collective?
When it comes to ostracizing, I'm a fan of it, but I think it should be used as a last resort, because reform and rehabilitation is the ideal outcome. Because we all look. I don't know about you two, but I didn't start here.
Right.
When I was in high school, I was a hoodlum. When I was a young Marine, I was a warmonger and a maniac. And then I learned stuff, and I became something admirable. I was not always something admirable. So when I'm making a decision about who need to be ostracized and who not, I usually say, how destructive are they being right now? Is the modality they're operating in right now so destructive? Is there no way to mitigate the damage this person is doing? If there's no way to mitigate it, if they're on a war path or on a rampage, then we got to ostracize them. If somebody stole $5 one time, let's have a talk about it. So we have to have discernment. We have to have, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. But again, yes, certain people need to be ostracized, but I would say only if they are just so damn destructive and they've demonstrated they will not turn away from it.
Right.
I think that's why I think this question has everything to do with organization, because I think within the structures of an organization, you can associate and disassociate with people. You can be exclusive and you can be inclusive at your own discretion based on an organization. I think I don't I wouldn't be an advocate for just across the board just shaming, ostracizing, getting rid of, because it doesn't matter if you're not talking about the confines of of an organizational structure, or the way I see it is, if somebody uh is a thief, or somebody abusive in our community, and they're destructive to our community, then yeah, you absolutely should marginalize that person, or ostracize that person based on the behaviors that they're exhibiting against our people. But at the same time, I agree with what you were saying, Brother Hannibal, about we all were once someone, and then we become who we are. Malcolm X said, there's no shame in having once been a criminal. The shame is in remaining to be a criminal, right? So the thing is, it's like, sometimes if that's somebody's walk in life, for them to have to navigate criminality to find themselves, then that is a walk that they will have to take alone. That's not a walk that the rest of our people are should be inclined towards, or should be led toward. So I feel like within the confines of an organization, we can lead our people toward where we need to go, and decide who will we allow to participate in our journey, in our quest towards our ultimate destination, right? I mean, I don't think you have to organize with everybody. I mean, some people they may be brilliant, but inside the organization, they may be destructive, you know and that means that you might have to move in another direction, and that person may find what they need in life um somewhere else. But I mean, within the context of an organization, the collective is the priority. So that's when you can get into the discretion of leadership inside of an organization. You can have those kinds of conversations, those arguments about what programming, what policy, what you should do, what we shouldn't do. You can do all that inside of an organization. Outside of an organization, you telling people what they should and should not do. Anything can happen. People do whatever they want. But you can enforce inside of an organization. So.
Right. And I think that component that Hannibal was talking about with spirit, and then also putting that inside of the structure, inside of the organization. So if we have a love for our people, we have that identity, we put it inside of an organization, then that's going to help us as a collective, and also being able to trust one another. Because if I trust you enough that I say I know that you love your people, then I'm going to trust that my $1,000 weighs as much as your $20. So I think, and what I'll do, we're going to try to stop about 9 o'clock. We can go ahead and put, if anybody wants to come up and ask a question, one at a time, to these very amazing, intelligent brothers. I'll put the StreamYard link in the chat. And I just want to let people know too, I'll have Dr. Melanie Stevenson on here tomorrow, who is the wife of the late Dr. Africa. And if you don't know who Dr. Africa was, he was very amazing holistic doctor, and he transitioned recently, and so she is going to be coming on here talking about building our village, building our communities, through holistic health. So please come and show her love tomorrow. She's just doing this right now. She says she just wants to help the community now because we have helped her so much over the years and with Dr. Africa. So please come show her love tomorrow, guys. And if you do want to, she says she'll do a couple health analysis. So if you want to show her your eyes or face or tongue, you can send me an email at speakmaat@gmail.com, and we'll do that. So if you want to, you can come up and ask a question, or if not, I have just one last question. So could we discuss the spirit, just the whole concept of the spirit, in how we can develop that with one another? So how do we develop that? Because I think we on here, we have that, and I think a lot of people in the chat have that. But how do we have that when so many of us don't? We do have someone coming up. So if y'all can answer that quickly for me, and then I'll bring up our guest.
I know. Oh, go ahead, bro. I've talked too much.
No, I talk too much.
Well, I was just gonna say it was easy for me to fall in love with my people when I began to learn about our history. Digging into the history, learning about Malcolm and the Panthers and Marcus Garvey and the list goes on and on and on. Harriet Tubman, Fannie Lou Hamer. You know, how could you not? You know, like we all. I hate the conversation that I be hearing in a lot of spaces, like Black Americans don't have culture. Like, you a whole lie. Like, you just don't know what it is, and if you did, you don't know enough about what culture is to know that if you embrace that, then that's your culture, and that's what you point to. I don't point, like, there are aspects of our culture that are horrible and some that are fantastic, and I embrace the fantastic ones and I reject the horrible stuff. Like, it may be Young Thug's music might be a part of Black culture to somebody else, and who am I to say that it ain't? But I just don't embrace that part. To me, the parts I embrace is the Panthers going door to door, doing sickle cell screening, when we didn't even know that we was the primary people who get sickle cell in America due to adaptation against malaria when we was on the continent. Like, that's admirable. Like, doing for self when everybody wanted us to be independent, that's admirable. That's amazing. That's respectable. Being so badass that the American government has to levy everything it has, all its power, against a bunch of 20-year-old Negroes from Oakland and who proliferated their stuff across the country. Like, how could you not love your people when you know and truly have an understanding of the magnitude of what they achieved?
Yeah.
So you got to start there. And if you can communicate that to a young person who's been told that they don't have no culture, that they're less than, well, then I bet you then the love will start to grow. Yeah,
that's so true. I know one of my students, when I was working in the school, she they partnered me with her because I guess she had like behavioral issues. And basically I told her a little bit, like not even a whole lot, a little bit about Assata Shakur. And she went on Wikipedia and looked it up, and she was like, "Oh, they was busting at the cops. Oh, that's crazy." And then she started reading more and more and more. And it's just interesting to me because to her, it's like every little piece of information she found about Assata Shakur, it just activated something in her. You know, you could see her lighting up. You could see her coming to consciousness. And I think like what you said, you really hit it on the head. If you really come into contact with the victories and the achievements of our ancestors, then it's very easy to fall in love with your own people. But outside of that, if you think that we're just the losers of history, and you think we're just enslaved, then you don't, and that's why you might not be proud of your own heritage, right? I mean, normally people start to become ashamed of their own heritage after they've been defeated in warfare, or they've been defeated in some other way. So the thing is, victories would make you proud, defeat would make you ashamed. So I really do believe that pride is really couched in understanding your own ancestors' achievements and your own ancestors' victories. Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head. You said it perfectly.
And I think sometimes we forget about how we came to it, like even understanding how we came to this consciousness and the learning that we came through and what we felt when we came to that. Like that's very powerful. And sometimes we forget it because we're all up here now. And so understanding our journey as well. 100 watts, peace, brother. Thank you for coming up. I can't hear you. Oh,
is he muted?
Are you muted?
You're keeping us in suspense.
You guys hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
there you
sir.
go.
Okay, can't hear you now.
I'm sorry, it's my signal. I have to jump back to the chat. I'm in a bad signal area. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right. So, yes. I do. Let's see. One moment, and I'll give that to you, Awa. So, any last? I think he said he might put it in the chat, his question. But any, I just really want to just let y'all know that it was a pleasure having y'all on here today. I thank y'all for coming on here. I'm going to listen to this again because y'all were just dropping so much knowledge. And everyone, y'all share this. But any last words? And I'm sorry, Brother Emo, do you have a YouTube or website or anything?
No, my sister, she been telling me to get a podcast or something.
Okay.
I've just been in school. Honestly, I keep my social media private too because I don't want to be arguing with everybody on the internet.
Okay, got you.
So, but when I do I will put something together. I just priorities. I have to do my dissertation before I do anything like that. But I'll be around. I'll hopefully. I'll be in the chat and different. I was recently on a Shrine of Ma'at show. That was really good. I've been on Omawale Africa's some of his shows. I think he got a bunch of shows. But so I try to I navigate the same circles, the same community. So when I do have something, I'll make sure I'll come back and touch base.
Yeah. So so you can come back anytime you want. I'll be asking you because I have so many other topics that I want to discuss.
Yeah, I love to. Building you guys was great.
Yeah. So I have a special topic in mind for even the both of you and adding a couple people on. But yeah, so Hannibal, any last thoughts? And tell us again about what you're doing for the school in Atlanta.
So here's the thing, I've been running this business for about 8 years now, and the concept is simple. Like the Panthers taught me, raise money and direct what you can towards self-help and independent work and supporting organizations that are doing work that helps Black people. So this month, I basically adopted Columbo. All the donations are going to be going towards Columbo. A portion of every sale. So every sale, if you buy something on my site for Kwanzaa or Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate, or just because A portion of that sale is going to go to Columbo this month. Next month, it's going to Gary Comer College Prep. Every month, it's a different organization.
Okay.
Because damn it, why not? You know, if we don't support our organizations, who's going to do it? You know, so I would just invite people to check out my site. So if you see something you like, get some. I do gift cards. You could do electronic gift cards. You could send them to somebody, and just know you're not just getting some apparel or a pin or a hat. You're also supporting organizations that support Black people. I'm not donating to. The only other thing I have a way that I don't even know if it appears on my site, but it's for like lung cancer. But primarily, like when I make direct donations, like we've done the Decarceration Collective. We've done over a dozen organizations that are working directly with Black people, with Black children, Black schools. And it's so appropriate that we're talking about education. And this month, we're sponsoring a school. A freedom school, an African-centered school, a place where they teach that your history didn't start in 1619. Okay, so just check us out, you know, and just, you know, follow us on the gram, etc., and just be Black and do Black stuff, you know. Everybody, look, I always say this, and I mean it. You can be an advocate and an activist anywhere you are at, if you're just doing things with blackness and love for your people and your community in your heart, and looking out for your brother or your sister to your left and right, and helping them when you get a chance, and shielding them when you get a chance, then you're being an activist, low key. So just do that. You know, don't feel no shame that you're not out there being a Garvey and a Malcolm. Everybody can't do that. Everybody can't be Farrakhan. Everybody can't be Huey P. Newton. Everybody can't be Dr. King. Everybody can't be Fannie Lou Hamer. Everybody can't be Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. Everybody can't do that. But everybody can bloom where they're planted. Right. Everybody can be a positive influence to the people that they come into contact with. Everybody can do what they can to transform the lives of the people that you have influence with. Don't waste your influence. Don't waste your energy. Channel it with intention and be transformative.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brothers. It was wonderful conversation. Hopefully I can have y'all back on again. And I just appreciate this conversation. It was amazing. And I can't say more than that. So yeah, just make sure y'all check out Hannibal's website, and continue to check out our brother here. I'll have him back on.
Yeah, my Instagram is imhotep_child, like
okay.
Imhotep child. So Imhotep_child.
Okay. So. All right. So moderator, can you put that in the chat for us? And I'll definitely start following you as soon as I get off of here. And yes, let's see, let me think. So just subscribe, like, share, and thank you guys for coming, and shout out to Mwale for introducing me to Brother Emo. And as always, Hannibal, it was amazing to see you again. And I'll see everyone next time. Peace, family.
Thanks so much for the invitation. My art is fantastic as always. And peace to the garden, peace to the chat, everybody in chat. Good to meet you, Brother Emo. And I look forward to our next convergence.
Yes, thank you. Okay, guys.
Peace, everybody.